how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. I'm Renee and I read a lot. And today I'm going over the last 2 weeks of reading that I've done because I did record a video last week, but I didn't have time to edit and upload it. And now it just kind of feels like last week's news. So I'm going to just start over with it. It is actually 8 books, which is over 2 weeks. So that's kind of a little bit actually less than I normally would read, but some of them have been so long that this was the best that I could do. So here we are. Also, my husband came home from deployment and we were spending a lot of time together. I had to deep clean the whole house. Leo, I swear on my life, if you keep messing with the door, I am going to put you outside and leave you there. Are we being fucking for real right now? He scratches at the door and ruins the insulation in an effort to get outside for God knows what reason, because it's cold out there and miserable, but I am tempted to literally just put him outside and be like, look, you want to be an outdoor cat? Here's what it's like. Fend for yourself. I can't do that because I'm too responsible, but it is a bit of like a secret fantasy sometimes when he gets like this. What was I saying? Oh yeah, my husband got back from deployment. I deep cleaned the house. I built some furniture. So I say built. It was from IKEA. I just put it together. But regardless, it's been a lot of work that I've had to do around the house. So I haven't had a ton of time to sit down and edit, or read for that matter. So here we are. Book 218 was Dance of Thieves. 5 stars, Mary E. Pearson. I did a whole book get ready with me review on this if my makeup looks familiar. So I don't want to spend terribly too much time going on this. If you watch every single video on my channel, which is some of you, okay, I see you, then you already know how I feel about this. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's set 6 years after the Remnant Chronicles. It's marketed that you can read it as a standalone book. You probably can, and I'm being dramatic when I say that. It would be confusing. But one of the Queen of Venda's elite guards goes to Tor's Watch, which is a part of the Kingdom of Islandia, which is a small kingdom on the continent, but wants to be independent. 3 guards actually go, 3 of the Queen's elite guards, but Kazi is the female main character in the story. They go to investigate treaty disputes, but they're searching for somebody who's a traitor against Morgan in the last war that the continent had. And she meets up with the head of the Ballinger family who runs Tor's Watch, Jace Ballinger. Again, not to be confused with Colleen. This is a completely separate Ballinger drama. And they get kind of put into a forced proximity situation when they are caught by human slavers and forced to try and survive and escape together. And Jace, the 19-year-old, he is a new head of the family. His dad had just died, so he's kind of dealing with that on his side too. It is a young adult romantasy. I think that there is medium plot without romance. I think the romance kind of drives the plot instead of the other way around. There's not just a hint of romance sprinkled in with plot, it's really romance based. But if you're into romantasy, if you're into YA, there's no spice. It's literally -1 chili pepper. I don't even think that they really even kiss until very far into the book. So if you're into romantasy, YA, not spicy books, I do think that this one was absolutely beautiful and worth it. Oh yeah, it's marketed as enemies to lovers. I wouldn't say that by any stretch of the imaginations. They're never really enemies, but there are other good tropes like found family, forced proximity, hurt comfort. There's a big trope in the second book that's one of my favorite tropes of all time, and it was really, really well executed. So even though it's not enemies to lovers, there is so many more of those really, really, really good tropes that I love that it made up for the lack of enemies to lovers. Even though it's marketed enemies to lovers everywhere I've ever seen it, I've got to heavily disagree with that. They were never set up as enemies. They just literally didn't know each other and then got thrown together. But enemies is a bit of a stretch, if I'm being honest. It is a duology. Vow of Thieves is the second one. They were both so worth it. I absolutely love them. I literally could not put them down. It was one of those books where I was sitting there I could go do something or I could keep reading. And I was putting off legitimate things that I had to do to read, which has been kind of rare lately. So to have that feeling again in a book was so beautiful. So I would recommend those. They were really good. Then I moved on to Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, which for anybody who is not aware, because I guess you live under a rock on BookTube, it is the second to Fourth Wing, the Empyrean's #2. It is also romantasy, adult romantasy though. It's not YA. There is spice in it. I wouldn't say it's as much spice as people make it out to be. There's a few spicy scenes for sure. It's maybe a 3 chili peppers out of 5. This book is long. It was almost 900 pages on my Kindle, and it took me 4 days to read. I thought that this one was good. I'm not the only one with this critique, okay? Don't come for me. I feel like I'm gonna have my head ripped off for this opinion, but I have to be honest here. I thought it was good. I thought the first was a lot better. I gave the first 4 stars. If I'm being honest, Iron Flame was like between a 3.5 and a 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars though, just because I did like the first enough that I wanted to give this one 4 stars too. It's editing Renee here. I forgot to mention this, but I did like it enough that I was having legitimate dreams about being involved in the world, and I like missed the characters once the book was done. So for as much as I have to complain about it, my subconscious was really vibing with it, and I do think that that says a lot. So 4 stars I do think was warranted in this case. But even like, it took until like 500-ish pages until I finally was back into it. And then even in like the last 100 pages, which is like the big action part of the book, I kept finding it really difficult to pick up. Like I kept putting it down to like go on Instagram. And like I had a cat on my lap. I'll put in a picture here. It was pretty cute. So I couldn't move. I just had my phone and my Kindle, and I still couldn't get myself to read it. So I thought that was kind of like a bad sign. I don't know. It picks up where the first book left off. Violet has found out that her brother is alive. She doesn't really trust Xaden because he's been keeping a bunch of secrets about the resistance from her. And they have to go back to the war college for Violet's second year, and Xaden's got to go out to the front because now he's graduated. But obviously things start to unravel further during their time there. Honestly, pretty confusing. There was not a lot of like recap for stuff that happened in the first book. So I read the first book back in like June or whatever, and I found it difficult to remember stuff that she was referencing without any recap. I found it difficult to remember whose dragon belonged to whom when they were talking. I found it difficult to remember, you know, maybe some of the more important plot points because there was no real recap to any of it. And then all the stuff in the second half of the book, like a lot more of the magic kind of gets explored, but I found it to be extremely confusing. I found a lot of the things that they did to not make sense in my brain. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in the second half of the book that I really couldn't follow. And I talked to a friend after reading this book, and she also couldn't follow it. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me being dumb or whatever, or missing things. We both were super confused. So if you don't really have to know what's going on with a book or a magic system or like the plot as much as you're there for the vibes, I don't think you would notice that or care. But I found it really off-putting that I couldn't really follow what was happening like at all. And Xaden and Violet's relationship had taken a really toxic turn, in my opinion, that I did not like, where they're just always fighting. There's so much fighting, and it got really, really repetitive, and I was pretty over it. I do enjoy a good bit of tension, but I think that this got really forced and drawn out past the point where I was like, yay, tension. It was like, come on, y'all are being so dumb. And I get it, they're young, but they're not that young because they're in their early 20s. So it's not like we're dealing with 16-year-olds like with most romantasy. We're dealing with like allegedly fully grown adults that should be able to work through this a little bit better. And Violet's whole cognitive dissonance behind Xaden is hiding things from me and it's not okay, to I am hiding things actively from my friends and it's okay, was really, really painful to read for somebody who's allegedly incredibly very smart, that she can't see the flaws in her own logic at all. Again, it follows them being the fantasy version of jet pilots. And again, there's just a lot of stuff that wasn't right with that. That was a criticism that I had with the first book, that it's based on the real life United States military and jet pilots, but it's wrong. It does it like wrong. It's a whole thing that I have where I feel like if we're gonna base something on something in real life and get everything else right to the point where we have like lieutenant colonel and like go that far into detail on it being based on the United States military, and then to just completely drop the ball when it came to how squadrons are organized, for example, I was like so frustrated. But and that continues in this book and gets honestly kind of worse. I could do a whole video talking about my issues with the Fourth Wing's military structure, but I don't think that most people who are watching this care about that, so I won't bore you with the details. Suffice to say, it bothered me. It was decent though. I think it wasn't as good as the first one, so I think that it kind of like lost a bit of that hype from me. But I think that that's usual with second books in a series. If it's not a duology, I feel like a second book in a series usually doesn't have the same Pull is the first, and there's a million reasons why I think so. I think now that you already know what you were expecting and your expectations are high, and there's not as much that the author can do to bring you in or be unique that they can do in the first book, and there's no closing action and wrap up and things tied together that there is in a last book. The middle books can sometimes fall a little bit flat, so I'm still excited to read the rest of the series, but I still was disappointed with the second book. And I think that that's a sentiment that may be echoed elsewhere because I haven't seen nearly as much hype for it as I had with the first book. But again, that could just be due to the nature of it's already very hyped. So there's not much more that it could be hyped, if that makes sense. 4 stars overall. Next, I read the Love the Way series by Willow Winters and what is her name? Amelia Wilde. Huge trigger warning here for mental health problems and them getting to a very bad place. So please skip here if that's something that you don't want to hear about. I completely understand. Do not risk your mental health for a book review. Please, I am begging you. I'll see you later. I've mentioned this before. I purchased Willow Winters' whole Discreet series without knowing anything about her as an author. I really liked the first maybe 16 of that series out of like 50 something. But now I'm kind of like just slogging through to get to the end to finish them by the end of the year if I can. This was 3 books. I gave them, I'm going to say probably an average of 4 stars. They were good. The first one was a little bit slow to pick up. The whole premise is that there is a socialite, very rich, kind of spoiled, think like Paris Hilton in the 2000s era girl, and she tries to herself. She's being let out of a mental hospital on conditions of a conservatorship, and she's being protected by bodyguards 24/7. And one of those bodyguards she feels attraction to, and he feels attraction to her back, and he's also got a tortured past. So of course you know where that's going. These books are what they are. They're contemporary romances, usually pretty spicy, usually a bit dark romances. I wouldn't say they're like anywhere near, when I give these 4 stars and I give Iron Flame 4 stars, it's a very different 4 stars. Just so we're clear, they're not like on the same level of writing or quality by any stretch of the imagination, but it's based on the enjoyment that I get on what they are marketed towards me as. So just to make that clear before anybody comes for me on that. I thought the first book was kind of slow to get into, but I liked how it picked up. It was BDSM vibes, which we haven't seen from the Willow Winters books in that Discreet series in a while, so I enjoyed that. I like the whole guard and who is protecting thing. I thought that was kind of fun, taboo, tense. And I really liked, in this book, it was surprising. It was the first Willow Winters book I've read with like LGBTQ plus representation. And I thought it was like a really interesting depiction of mental health and depression and like substance problems. I thought that it was handled pretty sensitively. I think that sometimes romance books can handle that stuff like kind of off-puttingly, but I did think that this was a pretty fair description. Again, their relationship is like a little bit toxic, a little bit quick, very like insta-lust, instant love, but I really like them for what they are. They were easy to read. I enjoyed reading them. I flew through them. I read them all in like 3 days, so take that as you will. Those were books 21, 22, and 23 at 200 in front of those numbers. 221, 222, 223. 224 was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This was one that my husband got me for my birthday. And it's come very highly recommended. I think that if you are anywhere in book spaces, you have probably seen this book, talked about, recommended, whatever. And for good reason. It is historical fiction, a little bit funny, feminist. There's also, I will say, a trigger warning on this book for sexual assault. So again, if you are not in a place where you want to handle that or hear about it, I completely understand. Skip here to be done with that. And I will catch y'all there. I really wavered here between giving it 4 stars, 4.5 stars, or 5 stars. It was really difficult for me to decide. And if I'm being honest, I still haven't, because I haven't written it down in my book journal, so I can change it to whatever I want. I am a free bird when it comes to this. It follows the plot of a woman who grows in the book between 20 and 30, and she is a scientist, a chemist specifically, in 1951 to 1961. It's kind of her story, how she got into chemistry, how she fell in love, how she ended up with a daughter. None of this is spoilers because it's all, it starts in the first page in 1961 and then it goes back in time to 1950s to kind of like show how we got there. And then now she's a single mom in 1961 and she is on a cooking show where she does afternoon cooking, but with kind of like a chemistry feminist twist in 1961, which is unheard of, And it is written really, really well. I found it really entertaining. I loved reading it. I enjoyed picking it up. I wanted to keep reading it. It was funny. It was like a breath of fresh air when dealing with these really serious topics. There were obviously a lot of heavy topics in this book: sexism, sexual assault, and Bonnie was able to paint them with a lens that felt very light while still maintaining the seriousness of the subject, but also injecting humor into it so that it's not completely unbearable. Not that heavy stuff should be fun, but sometimes heavy stuff can be too much if you're just constantly reading about it. But I thought she handled it very respectfully. And I loved the book overall. I thought it was really good. And I would recommend it to people. But the main character, Elizabeth Zott, is kind of insufferable. And I think that that's the point. Like, I think she's maybe not supposed to read neurotypical. She's probably a bit neurodivergent. But it was kind of a lot. Like, she's not good at rowing, so she reads a physics textbook and all of a sudden is perfect at it. I have played sports and I know physics, and nobody in the history of anybody, like, if it were so easy to read a physics textbook and like be good at basketball, Albert Einstein would have been an NBA pro. You know what I mean? Like, reminds me of like a Disney movie when they've got the nerd who goes to like basketball tryouts and he's like, if I do a 30-degree angle off the backboard and then with however many newtons of force, and he's doing all this in his head and everyone's like, whoa, when he makes the shot. But you're like, that's not how that works. That's not how that works even a little bit. And even if you were to like incorporate physics into it, which like, of course, everybody who plays sports does on some level know that force equals reaction, it takes you a while to get the feel of it. Do you know what I mean? Kind of a little cringy. Or, she puts out a grocery list for her show, but she puts it in chemical elements instead of like the word vinegar, which like nobody I know would do that. People know when they're talking to lay people. They know when they're talking to not scientists. Sometimes you can get confused and use words that you think everyone should know, but I don't think there's any chemist I've ever met who believes that everybody should know the chemical symbol for vinegar when they're going shopping, She kind of reminded me of Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, and not in a good way. But that's where I struggle, because I wanted to take off maybe a whole star for it or maybe a half star for it. But then in the same breath, I don't know if that's the point, if she's supposed to read obnoxious, in quotes, if she's supposed to read a little bit, neuroatypical, and if I'm missing completely the point of that character when I say I didn't like her. But I also think maybe I'm allowed to not like who I don't like and as a result take off points. But then it didn't seem right to like take off a whole star off of what was otherwise a 5-star book, just for the few instances when I couldn't deal with this character. So I think I've really settled on 4.5 stars, but it's 4.5 leaning towards 5, if that makes sense. That's where we're at. And then we did it. Ladies, men, and my non-binary friends, we have done it. We have accomplished what I set out believing was possible. In the middle, I thought was impossible. My hope got steadily drained from there. And then finally, this week, I realized it was actually possible all along. I have finished War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I know. I didn't think we would get here either. Honestly, I don't think anybody has noted this before, so I'm just gonna say it. That book is long as hell. That was a trip. I did it on audiobook and ebook, like jointly. I was like, oh man, my ebook copy is only 493 pages, so how bad can this be? And also the audiobook is only 8 parts and each of them are 2 hours, which means this is about 16 hours. If I put it on 1.2 speed, it's like 14 hours. what is everybody on about with this book is so long? Maybe their copies all have really large margins and huge font. It's the old people edition. No. It's 493 pages, but you have to swipe on the Kindle like 10 times to get through one page. And the first volume of the ebook was 16 hours out of 4 volumes. So 4 times 16 is 24 plus 40 is 64 hours. So it was not 16 hours, it was 64 hours, which is a bit longer than 16 hours. Even on 1.2 speed, I don't think I can do that math in my head. Probably like 50 hours. I'll do the math and I'll put it in. And it took me from June to November to read it. And I'm a quick reader and I listen to audiobooks all the time. So that should show you this was not a book for the faint of heart. I don't even know how you would, I have to take off my shoes. Kicked my makeup brushes everywhere. I don't even know how you would describe the genre is definitely historical fiction. It was historical fiction when he wrote it, because he wrote it in some year, and it's about the Napoleon invading Russia in like 1812. I don't know how you would describe the plot, the summary plot of War and Peace. Because, I went to go like Google it, and I saw that like the BBC had made it into a TV show, and their tagline was like, 3 young people in love set against Russia, the backdrop of Russia at war. I was like, that's not what War and Peace is about. And then I thought about it and I was like, maybe that is what War and Peace is about. It reminds me a bit, this is gonna sound strange, you just have to stay with me. It reminds me a bit of Game of Thrones, like A Song of Ice and Fire, where I feel like Tolstoy is just kind of telling us a historical story, but more in the form of a history, where he doesn't really have kind of like a beginning or end to the story, no like real thing. He has character arcs inside of his history, but it's not really a story he's telling as much as he is like just going over the lives of some people who live there, which I feel like is the same thing that George R.R. Martin does when he's writing A Song of Ice and Fire. Is it reads like a history book, like you're reading about all the stuff that happened and you're reading about like character arcs and whatever, but the story doesn't really feel like it has a logical begin or ending place because there's so much history that's developed. George R.R. Martin obviously writes that history and like makes it up or is inspired by real history. Tolstoy had the advantage of the histories, the backdrop of World War II, but his characters still have some World War II. I mean, Napoleon invading Russia, the Napoleonic Wars, but his characters still have so much of their own backstory and history, and it starts even from characters that are completely different than the characters that we end up spending the majority of the book with, because I feel like we're starting from, just kind of a more arbitrary piece of time, and then we go into these characters' lives, and it just feels like we're reading about these characters and not necessarily a story. So it's really hard to sum up. It's basically about some members of Russian aristocracy set in their historical setting with the backdrop of Napoleon invading Russia in 1812. And then there's also like a lot of discourse on the war itself, war in general, people. Oh, I meant to turn those lights off before I started to record. They make everything look so yellow. Okay, well, we're here now. There's a lot of discourse. The nature of humanity, how people make choices, how much of life is free will versus how much is preordained by other people's decisions and the decisions of the constraints of nature and whatnot. It's a lot more than just like what goes on to these characters, because a lot happens in the name of war. It's war and peace. It's not just peace. It's war also. And I think it can be really well summed up with the idea that actions have consequences. I feel like that's what the whole thing is about. Like even the beginning actions of the starting characters that we see and then we don't really interact with anymore, they have very severe consequences for the book moving forward. He talks a lot about the nature of actions and their consequences and how the consequences create new actions and new consequences, and the discourse of like life and human nature and divinity as a result. And I think that that's like the real way that you can sum it up, is like a very big, long treatise on the consequences of actions and the actions that those consequences produce. Overall, did I like it? I will say, I read this in a Goodreads review like months ago, so I don't remember exactly what it said, but I'm going to try and paraphrase. And then I remembered this review while I was in Tanzania, and I thought how apt it was, right? The reviewer likened reading War and Peace to climbing a mountain. That's a very accurate summation of what I think it is like to read War and Peace. It is a lot like climbing a mountain, where it's possible. Many other people have done it. You kind of do it for your own personal satisfaction. There's not really any external forces. I mean, maybe there is. Maybe you have to read it for like a class or something. But there's very likely, if you're reading it for yourself, the motivation is really just to like say you've read War and Peace and see what you personally get out of that experience, because a lot of people have claimed that they get something out of it, some sort of spiritual revelation or what have you. And it is a difficult journey, and there are a lot of times that you want to give up, and there's a lot of times where it feels like you're not going to finish or you're not going to make it up the mountain. But once you do, you feel this weird sort of accomplishment. It is rewarding. Like, I am glad to have done it. I'm glad that I climbed Kilimanjaro, and I'm glad that I've read War and Peace. But I think that you have to know what you're getting into when you start. You're not picking up a 177-page dark romance novel with smut thrown in. You're picking up something that it's going to take you a bit to get through. I am glad I did it. And I think I really liked the piece. Like, I really enjoyed reading about the Russian aristocrats and their relationships and drama and getting together and breaking up and blah, blah, blah. I was like really into that. I was excited to keep reading. The stuff that I didn't like was the war. So the war half of War and Peace I thought was boring, and the peace half I thought was interesting. The war half with like all of Napoleon moved his troops here, the Russians moved their troops here, blah, blah, blah. Now they're crossing the river. Now they're burning Moscow, whatever. I was like, I don't know why I thought it was boring, because I do read non-fiction books about war, and I do read historical fiction books about war. Maybe I just don't like it when they're combined. I don't know. That's something I have to look at in myself. But overall, I would say I liked it. I'd say it's probably like a 4-star read. I don't think I would consider it a 5-star. I mean, it's a 5-star in terms of like Tolstoy's ability to craft a huge interconnected story that was pretty interesting for the most part. But I think that I just wasn't interested in the war part. Is it bad if I rate it based on like how interested I was in reading it instead of like how well constructed it is and like important of a book it is? I don't think so. I think that that's just who I am as a reader. But that's just the truth. That's where we're going with that. I spent way too much of this book update talking about War and Peace. That is for sure. But I've been reading it for like 6 months, so I think we can forgive me for that. But anyway, those are the books that I read these past 2 weeks. I'm like 5 pages away from being done with Italian Harry Potter. I am probably going to finish Belladonna by Adeline Grace today. So we are chugging along for the end of November, but that's where we're at right now. As always, let me know if you've read these books, what you think, if you agree with me, disagree with me. If you're coming from me for my Iron Flame review, please be nice. I am just a little teenage 29-year-old girl at the end of the day. But no, I'm just kidding, please. I want to hear everybody else's opinion too. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll catch y'all in the next one. Bye.